Let's roll.
Hello and welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show. Here you get relevant and timely content you won't find anywhere else. You can learn more by going to mustreadalaska.com, and this show can be found on YouTube, Facebook, X, and your favorite podcast site. Let's talk truth about politics, the economy, and all things Alaska. Now, the host of the show, former state legislator, combat veteran, small business owner, and all-around great guy, Ben Carpenter.
Well, welcome to the Must Read Alaska Show, friends. I'm Ben Carpenter, your host and guide, as we brave a journey of discovery toward truth and independent-minded thinking. Must Read Alaska exists because discovering the truth is hard. It calls upon us to be relentless in defense of common sense, our faith in God, and the exceptional values enshrined in our Constitution. Freedom is not free. It's not for the timid. It was not secured by the weak of heart or mind. Maintaining freedom requires every one of us to be alert to daily encroachments on our liberties and on the grand deceptions of those seeking power and control over others. Every generation must pledge their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and we must never take our freedom for granted. We are not anti-government, we are pro-government, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And today we have with us several guests. I'm going to introduce them. Randy Ruaro and Dave Steeren are here, and we also have Rain and Robin with us. So if I can just turn it over to you for just a second to introduce your team there, Randy, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. My name is Randy Ruaro. I'm the Executive Director for AIDEA, the State of Alaska's Economic Development Corporation.
I'm Ramey Hammond, Executive Assistant to Randy Ruaro.
I'm Robin Reyes, Engagement and Communications Specialist for AIDEA.
And I'm Dave Steeren, AIDEA's Infrastructure Development Officer.
Awesome. Well, why don't we kick this off here and just, in case someone's listening and doesn't know what AIDEA is, describe what it is and what its mission is for me.
Sure, I can do that. So AIDEA is really, I think, reflective of two principles in Alaska's Constitution. One is that in Article 8, the state should develop its resources for the benefit of all Alaskans. And the other article is in Article 7, where we're supposed to use at least some of our resources to better the lives of Alaskans and their health and welfare. And so, AIDEA really reflects both of those principles. And the legislature passed its first bill creating the predecessor to AIDEA in 1962. And what the legislature realized at that point was that we were a new young state. There had just been a probably 4-decade fight with the federal government to get some authority and control over lands and resources. That was a major driver of statehood, as the federal government had withdrawn over 90% of the land in Alaska from any development. And so that got the attention, of course, of Congress even. And they agreed to offer statehood to Alaska, which also came with, the right to develop lands and resources in Alaska. And so AIDEA was born, 1962, and the legislature realized that there was a need for capital, for investment in the state to get things up and running. And we've been doing that ever since.
Well, that is a great segue into the next question I have. Just recently in the news, it was announced that the court case, Alaska, and it was basically AIDEA versus the Department of Interior, was resolved. Can you speak to how that was resolved and what that means for Alaska?
Sure, I can provide a little background as well. So in 1980, Senator Ted Stevens got some language in the Alaska Lands Act bill that set aside over 1 million acres in the North Slope called the 1002 area It was intended to be set aside for oil and gas development at a later date. Senator Stevens felt like he had a promise from other senators that development would be allowed to occur. And so the bill went forward, setting aside this acreage on the North Slope, the eastern part of the North Slope, for oil and gas development in the future. What he didn't anticipate is that senators, of course, change out. The numbers changed. The issue became very politicized, and he was unable to pass another bill that would officially open ANWR to oil and gas development. So from there, we fast forward to 2017, and President Trump supported language in a reconciliation tax bill that would open ANWR. It did open ANWR, and it said there shall be oil and gas development in the 1002 area of ANWR. That went forward to a decision allowing a lease sale. AIDEA bid on the leases, received 7 of the leases. The Biden administration came in and immediately stopped everything illegally, in my opinion, against federal law. And so AIDEA was forced to challenge that action in court, in federal district court. And we just received a decision from Judge Gleason that said, yes, the leases were canceled wrongly. And the issue was sent back to the Department of Interior under now President Trump to work with AIDEA on reinstating the leases and moving ahead with development.
So indeed, the Department of Interior's actions have been deemed illegal by the courts and have sent it back to their jurisdiction. Does that mean that the leases that you have now are subject to further guidance from Department of Interior, or are we able to move forward with developing those leases?
Right. So the decision basically meant that the Biden Department of Interior's actions to cancel the leases was wrongfully committed against federal law, and our leases are in effect and valid. The details exactly of the process to get everything officially moving forward from here is still probably open to discussion with Department of Interior. But as you know, President Trump is very supportive. The governor is supportive of moving ahead with ANWR. There are billions of barrels of oil in that section of ANWR, even the northwest corner of the 1002 area where our leases are. There are for sure billions of barrels of oil located there.
So that sounds great for Alaska. Is this also this is a real softball question, but it's good for America as well, right? Oil sales through these leases would benefit the federal government and the federal budget, correct?
Oh, that's correct. So there's some estimates done by the Biden administration in its paperwork and its study of ANWR before it issued a recent decision in December that estimates roughly $2 billion in annual revenue to the state of Alaska if the 1002 area was open to what they call unconstrained leasing activities. Basically, if it was opened up to its maximum extent, their estimate is $2 billion a year in revenue to the state, $782 million in royalties. Of course, part of that goes to the permanent fund, which is good, and roughly $1.2 billion a year in production taxes, and another $1.4 billion a year to the federal government treasury, which, as you're aware, and most Americans are aware, we're in deep debt.
Yeah, that's not the topic of this conversation, but it is something that weighs heavily on my mind is how do we nationally raise revenue, economic activity to provide an alternative to increasing budget sizes at the federal level and using debt to do that. As less like 27% of the budget is financed by debt, and it's unsustainable. It's insane that that's where we're at right now. I know that at my time in the legislature over the last 6 years, I saw kind of a decline, and what I perceived was a decline in investors wanting to invest in oil development around the globe and also in Alaska. So many of this was over, fears of global warming and that type of thing. Is that still a factor right now? I mean, we're talking to AIDEA, who's helping with investments. So from your perspective, is the industry kind of moved past that, or are we still kind of shackled by investors not wanting to invest in oil projects, especially in Alaska?
I would say that it's a little bit of both, right? I would say there are some companies that probably don't want to take on the environmental groups and that side of the spectrum. And we see what's happening with Tesla, right? That there's attacks against the company, boycotts of products, negative advertising. I mean, all of that comes with trying to do something positive for Alaskans and the nation in opening ANWR, right? I mean, you've seen some quotes maybe of opponents of opening up ANWR that they will, fight and fight to the end, and I believe they will. And that probably includes tactics that really, I think, amount to economic discrimination against the state of Alaska and the North Slope Borough and the people that live up there, which is interesting because the real cause of I think, decline in sea ice and snow cover in the Arctic is not oil and gas development in Alaska. It is factory pollution, frankly, from China and other countries in Southeast Asia that is drifting over the Arctic, covering it in some black soot and other pollutants. And that's, if they wanted to help Alaska's Arctic, they would be trying to onshore manufacturing jobs and produce more oil and gas in Alaska.
From an investment perspective, what are some significant barriers that exist to getting oil developers into Alaska to develop like they did? Maybe we can never get to where we were in the 70s, but what were some of the significant barriers to more development in Alaska?
I think you have to say the most significant barrier is what we just went through, where we have a federal agency who, for political reasons, does not want to develop Alaska. They want to make us a national park, and they won't let federal law or statutes get in their way, right? They would rather take that step and then litigate the issues for years in federal court before they ever concede that, there's a resource in Alaska that can be developed. So I think the federal permitting system and then the litigation that results. I saw an article the other day that said that federal U.S. permitting system was the second worst in the world, second only to Zambia. So, we've got to fix that somehow and make it much more timely and not subject to, the whim of whatever district court judge you happen to bring a case before. It should be more of a system that probably looks something like Canada's or Australia's, where the average permitting time, I think, is 4 to 7 years to actually get into production. It's 29 years in the U.S. for a mine. I'm not sure what it is for an oil and gas project, particularly in Alaska, but it's quite a bit of time.
Looking at it from a state perspective, is there anything that Alaska leaders can do to make it more likely or entice or just make it more likely that investors would feel comfortable bringing their money to Alaska?
I think from the state side, in terms of the state permitting system, I think we're in pretty good shape. I don't know that that's a large barrier, but what could Alaskans or Alaskan leaders do? They could press the congressional delegation for reform at the federal level of federal permitting. And there were some reforms passed in 2023, but more is needed. And I think you could even suggest to the federal delegation that they pursue change in federal law that would just delegate permitting authority to the state level for most issues. Fish and Game, I think Alaska's Fish and Game Department does a good job. Our DEC does a good job. Our DNR does a good job. We don't really need to do those things twice and then, litigate them at the federal level. I think the federal government could not only save money, but save time and produce more jobs and revenue if they just said to the state, if you want to permit this project, it's devolved to you, and use your expertise, knowledge of your state to just make the decisions.
During the Biden administration, there was a significant effort and a whole lot of money put forward to alternative energy sources. Alaska has benefited from natural resources, oil sales for a long time, both in the jobs that employ Alaskans and in the revenue that comes off of that to the state budget. What are the long-term projections for Alaska North Slope oil internationally? What is the demand for oil going forward? Is there evidence that there's agreement between governments and industry that oil is going to have to dry up, the production doesn't need to happen, or where's the demand at from an investment perspective?
In my opinion, the demand is still coming largely from Southeast Asia and India. And India, I think, is going to be the next large economy that really starts moving in manufacturing. They already are, and a very innovative country. And I think India, you'll see step up. I think with the growing population, you're still going to see a lot of need for oil and gas and petroleum products. So I don't believe that demand for those things are going to go away anytime soon. I think you'll continue to see development of wind and solar, geothermal, and other energy types, but I think you're going to see a demand for oil and gas for quite a while.
Jumping back to the court case, what's next for AIDEA and the leases? What's next, and what's the time frame look like?
Right. So one of the first things we're going to do is move for attorney's fees because it was very expensive to litigate. And the issue that the judge found that the Department of Interior was wrong on was a very obvious, apparent regulation that said before you can cancel a lease, you have to have a court order to do that. Well, clearly they didn't have a court order to do that, and I think clearly violated the terms of the lease. So one of the first things we're going to do is ask for our attorney's fees. It's expensive to litigate. And then we'll start meeting with the Department of Interior and figuring out next steps to how to go ahead and advance the effort in ANWR. We'd like to do some 3D seismic. We have some reports that indicate very likely presence of large quantities of oil, but it'd be great to confirm it with 3D seismic. At that point, I think you've got a project that you can market to companies that are not afraid of the environmentalists and would be willing to advance development and production in ANWR.
Stepping away from the oil and gas conversation for just a minute, when I think of AIDEA and when I've talked to other folks who have talked about AIDEA, the perception is that AIDEA is focused on big projects. And so I would like to have this opportunity to ask the question, is AIDEA focused on large multi-million dollar, hundreds of $1 million projects only? Or does AIDEA also serve a function for entrepreneurs in the state that are maybe smaller scale economic opportunities?
Sure. Actually, we run the whole scale, right? We have loan programs that are aimed at small business owners up to $700,000 who are just getting started. We have a loan program that's targeted to rural Alaska. That's, again, a smaller loan program. We have what we call the LPP, or loan participation program, which is spread out across the state and does anything from small loans up to 25 million. We do quite a bit of business there. And then we do have these other large projects, these resource projects that are controversial but we're also looking into new areas, new frontiers of investment, such as data centers and other things. So we're not just all about the big projects. We're just as proud and happy to serve Alaskans who are starting a small business, a mom and pop restaurant, as we are, to go forward on a large resource project.
Well, now that we've got the Trump administration full speed ahead here, it looks like energy development in the state of Alaska has a friend at the federal government. Where do you see the major opportunities? Maybe not just in oil and gas, but where else in the state? What other sectors or what else do you see opportunity for economic growth in the state?
Right. I think mining and particularly critical minerals will get a boost from the president and his policies. We obtain most of these materials, these types of minerals, from overseas, China, Russia. Although I think China just recently put in an embargo on exports of germanium and some other types of critical minerals to the U.S. And that's an issue at both a national defense and a national security level. Obviously, if you follow the war in Ukraine, almost every weapons system that they're using involves critical minerals or rare earths used in those weapons systems in some way. So every day, there are critical minerals being used back and forth by each side as a defense or an attack offensive weapon. And I think the president is very aware of this issue and will probably be pushing policies and budget items that advance the development of rare earth and critical minerals.
I certainly hope that has something to do with Alaska. I mean, we've got a lot of rare earth minerals and a lot of land and opportunity. So that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Well, is there anything else that we have not covered today that you feel is important that Alaskans know, either about AIDEA or about the future economic picture of the state of Alaska that you want to share?
I would just add, if we're successful or when we're successful in developing a resource project like the Red Dog Mine, we're generating good paying jobs for Alaskans that allow them to stay in their communities and live a subsistence lifestyle. And those jobs pay. I'm not sure what the average pay is for a miner right now. I believe it's over $100,000 a year. And so when we're successful with these projects, big or small, the benefits to Alaska and Alaskans is really significant on an individual level, plus a local level with property taxes and other things. And then at the state level, we're generating revenue to the state. As you're aware from your time in the legislature and currently, our revenue is not keeping up with our expenses. So another way to gain more revenue is to develop your resources. And I think that was the original idea at statehood, is we would support ourselves right through resource development.
I have spoken on this at length in multiple opportunities.
Yeah.
From the legislative perspective, we're looking at the permanent fund nest egg as our economic growth for government. Right. But really what we should be looking at from a legislative perspective is economic growth in a private sector economy that supports the demands of the people. Meaning let's not send people to Juneau and ask them to spend money that we're not willing to pay for in the form of some sort of tax or economic, supported by economic activity. So anyway, that's another conversation for another day, but totally relates to growing the economy in the mining and oil and gas sectors. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. I think that probably wraps up our time here. If you're listening to the show and want to support the activities that you've heard and want to keep the lights on, help us keep the lights on, please go to mustreadalaska.com and click on the donate link. Your support would be greatly appreciated. For Must Read Alaska, this is Ben Carpenter signing off. Stay frosty.